Welcome to the Food Revolution Summit, where we explore how you can heal your body and your world with food. This is Ocean Robbins, and I am joined by my dad and colleague, John Robbins, in welcoming our guest, Dr. Joel Furhman. Joel Furhman, MD, is a board-certified family physician and a researcher who specializes in reversing disease through excellent nutrition. He is the million-copy #1 New York Times best-selling author of many books, including his latest, Eat for Life, the breakthrough nutrient-rich program for longevity, disease reversal, and sustained weight loss. Dr. Furhman is a wildly popular host of a whole bunch of PBS specials, and he operates a medical office in New Jersey and the Live In, Eat to Live retreat in San Diego, where people come from all over the world to lose weight and recover their health. He's also president of the Nutritional Research Foundation. So now, Joel, my dad and I are so grateful to you for all your extraordinary work, and we're so glad to have this time with you. And now, for this interview, I'm going to hand it over to my dad and colleague, John Robbins.
Well, thank you, Ocean, for that splendid introduction. And thank you, Joel, for being with us again.
Oh, my pleasure. Excited to be here and talk to you guys.
I'm excited, too. You always have so much to bring and share and convey that's of so much value to people. That's the thing. Your work is of such great service. And I noticed that you dedicated your latest book to, and this is the quote that you have, to all people suffering from serious medical issues who were never informed that they could recover their health with nutritional excellence. The lack of information has denied them their inalienable rights. Joel, can you elaborate on why you dedicated your book this way?
It's actually the reason why I became a physician to begin with, because we're always hearing the term, give people informed consent. And even through medical school, I was told that, oh yeah, we know you're right, but people aren't going to want to do that, and you're not going to make money that way, or whatever their point was, that most people aren't going to want that kind of care, they're not going to change their habits, whatever the negativity was. And my response always was, well, you can't paternalistically make that decision for people. We have to thoroughly inform people that they don't have to have psoriasis the rest of their life. They don't have to have lupus and kidney failure and kidney transplants. They don't have to, in other words, if we have the means to get people well through nutritional excellence, then we have to inform them of that, let them make that decision. So it's been such a peeve of mine and such a problem. And I, even this culminating, and of course, this Eat for Life, which is intended to be my last book out of the 12 or 13 I've written, I still am hitting home on the same critical issue here, that everybody deserves to know that they don't have to have heart attacks, they don't have to get a stroke or get dementia, and autoimmune conditions are reversible, and fibromyalgia is easier preventable and reversible. And the point is, I want to show that, try to show that in this latest book, of course, that if people really were truly informed with all this correct information, including how your taste buds adapt and you learn to love this way of eating, with all this information, I feel the majority of people would choose not to choose the typical medical route of taking toxic, cancer-causing drugs the rest of their life and suffering with horrible side effects and illnesses that could have gone away completely. And instead, we see almost everybody opting to take poisonous drugs for the rest of their life because they're just not informed.
Well, they're not, and we're trying to rectify that. We're trying to help people get accurate and credible information that they can build their life on and make healthy choices based on. Still today, though, many people, maybe even most, assume that the most important factor in determining how healthy a person will be are their genetics and how much access they have to doctors and to medicines. And while all that can be important, are you saying, Joel, that the best prescription for a long and healthy life, and even for reversing many common disease conditions, is a whole foods, plant-strong diet that's exceedingly high in nutrients?
Yes, I'm particularly saying that we're not only talking about prevention. The war on cancer has failed. We can't buy ourselves into preventing cancer. We have to earn it. But I'm saying that the diet style that has the most potential to prevent cancer, slow aging, and extend human longevity is also therapeutically most effective to reverse the vast majority of chronic degenerative and chronic illnesses people suffer from. It's not even comparable to medical care, because conventional drug-centered care is not even 1/100th as effective as a diet designed for nutritional excellence. I'm also saying that this diet style that I'm recommending sometimes may need modification for particular conditions. And there's some knowledge involved in using excellent nutrition as a therapeutic modality. But instead of teaching that and studying that and sharing the benefits and results with the medical profession, this message is silenced and is completely unavailable to the most of our society because they have no idea it even exists.
It's true, and we're trying to change that. One of the characteristics that I've noticed of the results that you achieve with excellent nutrition that I find particularly fascinating and important is that many of your patients were already on what most people would call healthy diets and what they themselves thought were healthy diets before adopting your nutritional protocols. And then once they began taking the path of your Nutritarian approach, they typically don't get a small amount of improvement. What they experience, though, is a truly dramatic improvement in their health and in the reversal of disease. So, Joel, how does your dietary approach differ from the mainstream ideas of what a healthy diet is?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer briefly, but I'll just say that the foundational principle of a Nutritarian diet has to do with moderate caloric restriction in the context of micronutrient excellence, meaning micronutrients, meaning vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, antioxidants, both in the quantity and the variety and the comprehensive exposure to all nutrients that humans need without taking in excessive calories. And the reverse is true, that when we achieve this degree of micronutrient comprehensive exposure in all the right amounts, when we get this high exposure to both the amount and the complexity and variety of micronutrients, it naturally suppresses one's appetite. So you're not desirous of overeating, and your weight naturally gravitates towards a favorable weight without feeling that you're uncomfortably on a diet and having to go around hungry and restrict calories. So even though we want people to have a low body fat and a low BMI and low body fat percent and have a good muscle to fat ratio, they don't have to walk around starving themselves to do it, because what I'm saying right now is the proper exposure to nutrients makes the body desire the right amount of calories, and they instinctually now desire the amount of calories they require and not excess calories.
I've noticed that people who eat a lot of highly refined carbohydrates and other junk foods often will overeat. They often become heavy and carry extra weight because they aren't actually getting the nutrients they need. Their bodies are still craving the nutrients they need. And so they keep eating more, hoping to get it from their food, but they're not eating food that has it. So if you're eating nutrient-rich food, if you're eating vegetables and fruits and seeds and whole grains and legumes and beans and berries and mushrooms and onions, all the foods that you recommend, you're getting the micronutrients, you're getting all the phytochemicals, you're getting all the antioxidants that your body needs and craves. And so you aren't hungry for more nutrition and your body's more relaxed. That's my experience.
Well, that's the point. And I discuss in a lot of my work how when you don't eat a diet that's healthy, you build up more metabolic waste products and toxicity in your tissues, meaning things like more free radicals, reactive oxygen species, advanced glycation end products, and other even exogenous toxins from the food you're eating, like heterocyclic amines and others. So when you build up more toxins in the body, then you feel more fatigued all the time, because as your body is circulating these toxins, it wipes you out, makes you feel fatigued, and you need to overeat food to use food as a stimulant to keep your energy levels up. So if you're not digesting food, you feel wiped out. When your dietary quality is poor, you develop what I call toxicosis, and the toxicosis can only be made comfortable by the overconsumption of calories and keeping the digestive tract busy at all times. So it halts detoxification, so you don't feel ill and go through withdrawal.
Joel, even with all you've seen, are you sometimes still astonished by what the body can do to heal itself when it's provided with the optimal nutritional environment to maximize self-healing?
I'm not as surprised because obviously I'm doing this more than 3 decades, but it's always tremendously rewarding and exciting. And I'm literally jumping up and down inside with excitement when I see people make these incredible recoveries. So it never ceases to excite me and be so fun. I mean, I had, for example, a recent man. He was a mayor of an East Coast city, and he was so young and he already had kidney failure. And of course, he left the hospital to come here because they couldn't even control his blood pressure with Lasix, hydralazine, all these medications. His blood pressure when arrival was over 200, over like 130, and his kidney was blown out, and his diabetes was out of control. And giving him all these drugs, they couldn't control him. And while he was here, of course, we got rid of his diabetes and his high blood pressure on no medications, but I knew it would take longer for his kidney to go back to normal. I didn't know how much his kidney could return to normal. And so we stayed here 2 months. And then I just got a call from him in the last week or so that he repeated his kidney function number and the number is back in the normal range. Everybody here was just jumping up and down with excitement because we love this guy. So it's just always such a thrill to watch people get well. And as you guys may be aware, in my life, I've had people on the National Renal Transplant list waiting for a new kidney with lupus, a young 16-year-old girl who then made a complete recovery. And I've had people, in the hospitals getting experimental IV treatments because they couldn't break their headaches that were so severe. And they had to miss a whole year of, 2 years of high school, for example, and get these people well again. So it's always tremendously thrilling. And I think that's what I hoped for when I became this type of physician. I went to medical school with a specific intent to be a specialist in nutritional medicine and to be able to afford people that opportunity to choose this type of healing approach. And it's, of course, never ceased to thrill and excite me in doing this type of career.
That's a beautiful story, and I know there are thousands like it. And that's one of the reasons I'm so glad that we have this opportunity to bring this knowledge and wisdom and understanding to so many people, because so many people can benefit from it. And Joel, I want to get specific about the nutritional protocol that you advocate. Its track record is well proven now, very compelling evidence in favor of it. And you've recommended what you call GBOMs, which is an acronym that stands for greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds. Now, you're not saying that's all we eat, but those are the foods to base our nutrition on. And I'd like to take a few minutes to talk with you about these food groups, the G bombs. And the first is the G is greens, which includes, of course, kale and collards and spinach and broccoli and arugula, Brussels sprouts, mustard greens, chard, many other green vegetables. I'm remembering a study done at Harvard where they analyzed the food groups, and greens turned out to be associated with the strongest protection against every major chronic disease that they looked at. Every additional serving of greens produced a 20% reduction in risk for both heart attacks and strokes, for example. Joel, I'm sure our listeners have heard again and again that they should eat more greens, eat their greens. Can you help us all to understand just why that is such an incredibly powerful and beneficial thing to do?
Absolutely. And also to reemphasize that point that if we look at studies and we say, okay, what's the food most protective against breast cancer of all foods in the dietary landscape? And the answer, of course, is green cruciferous vegetables has the most power. But if you say what's the most effective against heart attacks and strokes, the answer is still green vegetables, green leafy vegetables, green cruciferous vegetables. If you look at dementia, it's the same answer. If you were doing these seminars on how to eat to prevent dementia, there would be no different on the same dietary style that maximizes slows the aging process and maximizes protection against cancer and makes us live longer. And I have to just say that because people will say, and I'll sometimes use the term, slow the aging process. And I want to add that with current technology, I see actually even better results than slowing the aging process. I see people actually aging in reverse, which we can measure now with various high-tech parameters. And we can see people's skin, even their hair color can turn from gray back to brown again. I literally see people getting even who have created damage to their DNA and aged themselves prematurely, actually build back and restore health and actually a lower biological age. The body can turn off the expression of those genes that have genetic defects that could increase a person's risk of some disease or increase a person's risk of allergies or breast cancer, the GSTP1 gene, the BRCA gene, and the body has the ability to recognize those genes and suppress their activity with a high enough consumption of green vegetables. So all these things are possible only when we have a sufficient consumption of green vegetables. I always make the joke and say, if you don't like green vegetables, you better live close to a hospital, as if that's going to help you anyway, right?
Yeah, right. Well, green vegetables are really important. You mentioned breast cancer a moment ago, and it brought to my mind a study that I saw last fall that came out. They'd followed more than 50,000 women for 8 years, and they found a 50% increase in breast cancer risk in those women who consumed the largest amount of cow's milk compared to those who consumed the least. And yet, Joel, women are told today that they need cow's milk or they need other dairy products to have strong bones. So, Joel, what's the real truth about dairy products, and particularly for women?
Well, I wouldn't say it's okay for men to do it, because there's certainly a link between cow's milk consumption and prostate cancer as well. So for both men and women, these are both hormonally sensitive cancers that have similar causes. And obviously, cow's milk particularly drives certain growth-promoting hormones, particularly IGF-1, and even lifts IGF-1 more than sugar does, and more than even meat does, let's say. So in any case, the overall high exposure to high protein muscle meats of meat, chickens and things and as well as dairy also promotes higher IGF-1. But cow's milk on top of those foods and on top of all the processed foods Americans eat adds a different layer of risk.
So when you say that dairy consumption elevates IGF-1 levels, why specifically is that something to be avoided?
Well, IGF-1 is a growth hormone and can help us stabilize muscle mass and facilitate growth as a child. But because Americans eat so much animal protein, and particularly dairy products, their IGF-1 rise into a dangerous level of promotion, which now excites excessive growth as an adult. And when you're no longer growing taller, you're growing wider, but in any case, it also stimulates production of cells that shouldn't be growing, in other words, promoting cancer. So IGF-1 has factors to promote angiogenesis in excess. And the word angiogenesis means the growth of not just cells replicating, but blood vessels now grow more channels and highways to feed those cells with more nutrients and more oxygen and more sugar so they can grow, replicate, and eventually metastasize. With low levels of IGF-1, abnormal cells or cells that are damaged in some way still are too handicapped. They're not able to replicate fast enough and evade immune system capture and cause cancer in a low level of IGF-1. So as you cut out the dairy and reduce your animal product consumption sufficiently, then obviously IGF-1 gets into a more favorable level. Now, on the other hand, there are some vegan diets and some people who are on particularly not vegan diets that aren't healthy enough or don't have sufficient protein in them, and they could drop their IGF-1 too low as they age because the protein bioavailability and digestion goes down with aging. So we want to hit that sweet spot. That's where a Nutritarian diet kind of shines because it has enough of the, you could say, the protein bioavailability and the higher protein plant foods, including greens and seeds and nuts and beans and quinoa and all these foods that are actually plant that are protein rich, and enough variety so you have the full amino acid pattern that the body needs for optimal health as it ages too.
You mentioned some people eating a poorly designed plant-based diet. There's a lot of young people today who are going plant-based, and some of them, like, say, Greta Thunberg, are doing it in order to lower their carbon footprint. They want to help fight climate change. They want to protect the environment. Others are doing it because they've learned about the terrible cruelty that's inflicted on animals in the production of factory farm meat and dairy products and eggs. And they want to align their food choices with their caring for animals and for their compassion. And others are doing it for health reasons. But even they might not have the most complete understanding of how to fully accomplish their health goals. Joel, in terms of an optimally healthy diet, what are some of the common mistakes you see people making who are exploring a plant-based eating path?
Well, the major mistake they make that results in later life disease and dementia and frailty, which we see so frequently, is people thinking fat is the enemy. And then in doing so, are not only avoiding oils, but also avoiding nuts and seeds, thinking that's going to improve their health. And that inevitably results in more frailty, poor skin, and of course, mental problems as they age very often. The plant-based diets that's overly dependent on, let's say, carbohydrate like potato, rice, or other processed foods doesn't give enough of protein bioavailability and protein density because the people are not eating enough beans in particular. It's the beans and the greens and the nuts and seeds, those three foods. Beans, greens, nuts, and seeds, that combination that can double the protein content of a plant-based diet. There was a recent study that came out, I think, about 2-3 weeks ago that showed that a large study on long-term effects of vegans compared to meat eaters and showed the increased risk of bone fractures and osteoporosis in vegans compared to people who ate meat. And part of that was attributed, they thought, to the fact that the meat eaters were heavier and fatter and larger, meaning protecting their bones, but it couldn't account for the differences. There were other factors that were ascribed under careful examination to the fact that a lot of the people on vegan diets weren't getting enough protein and calcium and were getting muscle wasting and bone wasting with aging. I made a response to that in one of my blog posts comparing a typical, higher carb, low fat vegan diet, which compared to a Nutritarian diet that had almost double the calcium and double the protein, just from the fact that we included more beans, more nuts and seeds, and more green vegetables. And just the slight changes in the dietary pattern made such a huge difference from a diet being protein inadequate to protein adequate.
Well, you're talking about beans here, which are one of your G bombs. One of the B's in G bomb stands for beans. And I know that that group that you're referring to also includes lentils and other legumes. A lot of people are afraid of these foods today because they've been told that lectins are very dangerous, and beans, of course, are high in lectins. So, Joel, what's the truth about lectins and beans, and why do you recommend that we eat beans and other legumes every day?
And by the way, I also recommend people eat soybeans, not, in their natural form, because they have very powerful anti-cancer effects against breast and prostate cancer. I want them to regularly include soybeans in their diet as opposed to avoiding them. And I prefer people eat them in their natural forms, such as edamame, which is a boiled soybean, or to get the dried soybean that you soak overnight and cook into a soup and to use or make into a chili. So I want people to eat, like you said, eat a variety of beans in their diet, including different types, red and black, and different white beans, different beans, including lentils and peas as well, are a superior form of carbohydrate that are particularly protein rich and are high in resistant starch and fiber. And to answer your question about lectins, that's been a myth, so to speak, an exaggerated property that the lectins in beans, the ones that have harmful effects, are entirely deactivated when the bean is thoroughly cooked. And so it is true that beans could have some harmful lectins in them, and a person could develop digestive upset or some type of issue if they chronically were eating undercooked or raw bean products. But who does that? Everybody knows that beans have to be cooked very well. So if you have a concern with that, obviously, when you're putting your beans in the pressure cooker or the crock pot or whatever it is, or just in a soup pot, or you just make sure that you let it cook sufficiently so the bean gets soft. And we're talking here about, the lectins that are contained in larger beans like the navy beans and the red kidney beans that could be harmful if you're eating them not thoroughly cooked. Otherwise, the lectins that do survive cooking have been shown to have beneficial effects and even bone strengthening effects and even anti-cancer effects. The harmful lectins are wiped out with cooking, and the beneficial lectins that still remain are good to consume. So beans are just a superfood, and it's unusual for people to be even allergic to them. Most people have trouble digesting them, just have to start with small amounts and let the body build up the bacteria and the enzymes and learn how to handle them better with time of eating them and increase them gradually. And of course, it's not a highly allergic food, and most people can handle beans, a favorable amount of beans in their diet.
You mentioned that the lectins in beans are deactivated by cooking, which of course they are, and very few people would eat raw beans. But we do eat raw bean sprouts. I'm thinking of mung bean sprouts, and there are others. Are those at risk for lectin problems?
Not small beans like mung beans, but if you sprouted the larger beans like azuki beans or kidney beans, then you're better off either eating them as a microgreen where you cut the bean off or letting them grow long enough so the bean turns into a root and most of the bean is gone. We can sprout and make pea sprouts and still eat the pea. That's not going to have lectins in it. But I think we're talking here about like the red kidney bean and the cannelli bean and maybe the azuki bean and the black navy black bean. And those foods, those beans should not be used for sprouting unless you're going to be using them only as a microgreen.
There is the belief in our culture that soybeans can cause or contribute to the development of breast cancer and other hormonal cancers. I've seen evidence to the contrary, really, to the absolute contrary. They're saying that soybeans are especially protective against cancer, even compared with other beans. Can you help us understand this issue?
As we put together the high-created studies, we show that higher intake of soybean products like edamame and tempeh and even tofu has shown to have reduced risk of breast cancer. And we think that these estrogen-like compounds, the genisteins and other estrogen-mimicking compounds, have the effect to block the estrogens, your own body's produced estrogens, from stimulating the production of breast tissue proliferation. In other words, they have anti-proliferation and cell replication effects on human breast tissue. So they actually block the estrogen receptors on breast tissue from being overly stimulated. So even though they're estrogen-like compounds, they don't stimulate the receptors, they block them. And interestingly, the E2 receptors on bones, the estrogen receptors on bones that help bring bone density, are not blocked but stimulated by soy. What I'm saying is it's fascinating because the consumption of soy products leads to stronger bones and muscles, give you adequate protein on a vegan diet, increases the protein bioavailability and absorption, and actually promotes estrogen receptors on bones that keep bones strong in postmenopausal women without stimulating breast cancer at the same time, while actually decreasing the potential for breast cancer. So they work very favorably on different parts of the body, and it's a wonderful food to include in your diet.
It is. And you mentioned three forms that I'm very familiar with, and I imagine most of our listeners are: edamame, tofu, and tempeh. What about soy milk, Joel? Is that also good for us?
Yes, well, to be clear, that tofu is made from soy milk. So tofu and soy milk are similar, and edamame and tempeh use the whole soybean. And because it uses the whole soybean, it contains more of the fibers and probably has more longevity promoting effects when you use the whole food. So I'm trying to include edamame, tempeh, and also the dried soybean that we soak and reconstitute to make chilies and soups out of, to include that in the diet regularly. And then to use tofu and soy milk as an adjunct to that, or as a smaller part of the soy protein, because even though they're healthful and shown to have beneficial effects, probably not as strongly health beneficial as the whole food in the tempeh or edamame or soybean form. You were mentioning a study that showed that women were followed with breast cancer, or women were followed with various diets showing green vegetables and vegetables had the most protection against cancer, and cow's milk increased risk of breast cancer. Also showed that even though women who ate the most vegetables had the lowest risk of cancer, people who ate fruits and vegetables combined still had lower rates of cancer and better outcomes than people just eating vegetables alone. Again, making the point that even though we're recommending these foods, we still want nutritional variety and not dependency on just one food in your diet.
That issue of nutritional variety and getting plenty of different types of fiber and getting different blends of amino acids from your foods, I think is really an important piece here that sometimes gets lost. And one of your G-bombs is mushrooms. And mushrooms are not known for having high levels of vitamins or minerals, certainly compared to a lot of other foods like greens. But they do contain some unique compounds that make them powerfully protective against cancer and other diseases. Joel, what can you tell us about mushrooms and why they belong and how do they belong in an optimally healthy diet?
Well, right. I mean, of course, I'm a big fan of mushrooms and their effects to protect us against diseases, and the fact they're an incredibly powerful food to stabilize our DNA and to give ourselves, you could say, an immune system shield, and DNA protection. And also, we were talking about the variety of food in the diet, even getting a variety of different mushrooms, a variety of seeds. All these things are important because not just the variety of amino acids, but also food contains toxins and other things that are not healthy. And all foods contain some, you could say, mild toxins. Even mushrooms contain a toxin called agarotine. And we shouldn't be eating a lot of raw mushrooms because we can expose ourselves to too much agarotine, especially if we're eating too much of that family of white button mushrooms or portobello or cremini mushrooms, which are all the same family. So we want to eat mostly cooked mushrooms. But the point I'm making right now is that even too much flaxseed contains too much of a toxin or too much, so the variety of food exposes us to a more variety of nutrients, but also exposes us to a less concentration of one particular toxin. And the body works better with a broad spectrum of toxic exposure because it not only has the ability to eliminate the toxins, but it builds up resiliency and more strength, inherent strength against stress when it's exposed to a variety of toxins, not a lot of one type of toxin. So that's another issue here. Now, mushrooms, on the other hand, of course, are so important because they're not very high in vitamins and minerals, but they do have some unique phytonutrients that extend human lifespan. And one is they're the strongest anti-angiogenic food, which is anti-fat storage and anti-cancer cell replication, but they're also the strongest as an aromatase inhibitor, which means mushrooms naturally keep estrogen levels favorable. And they also obviously reduce excessive insulin levels as well. But they're a food that helps us with this concept of hormonal favorability, keeping excessive hormones at bay. And people who are overweight produce excess aromatase excitation and excess insulin, excess estrogen. And mushrooms have an effect that opposes that and does the opposite. So mushrooms help you lose weight, but they also help protect against the damage that the extra fat on the body caused and help people get healthier as they're losing weight and aid in their weight loss and to actually work against the damaging effect of fat on the body. Now, mushrooms also contain this unique substance called ergothioneine, and there's ergothioneine receptors in most cells in our body. And since mushrooms have the most ergothioneine of almost other foods, and the receptors that help stabilize and protect the mitochondria and the DNA and aging of the cell, it's almost as if our body has been genetically engineered and constructed in a manner to get benefit from mushrooms in the environment around us because we have these ergothioneine receptors. And I find this fascinating, how the body's been designed to utilize these compounds from natural foods that are in our natural environment, showing that humans and other primates are naturally mushroom-consuming species, and we're designed to be eating these foods, obviously. Otherwise, our cells wouldn't contain the machinery to benefit from those compounds contained in those foods.
Well, when you're talking about the benefits of mushrooms and you're cautioning us about eating raw mushrooms, saying we should eat mostly cooked or entirely cooked mushrooms, I wonder, does this mean that we should eat the medicinal mushrooms? There's some exotic mushrooms that are available, maitake I'm thinking about, or lion's mane. They're expensive, they're exotic, they are reputed to have remarkable medicinal properties. But can we get some or most or any of the important elements that are contained in mushrooms from common mushrooms, portobello mushrooms, cremini mushrooms, even the white button mushrooms that are sold so commonly?
Yes, the answer is that the cheaper mushrooms, the white button mushrooms and the cremini and the portobello, still have powerful angiogenesis inhibitors and aromatase inhibitors and benefit and contain these compounds we're talking about. But there are other beneficial elements that these simple mushrooms don't have in shiitake and maitake and lion's mane and trumpet and oyster and all these mushrooms you're talking about. So there is some advantage to having mushroom variety in your diet because there's other beneficial compounds that are not found in the white button mushrooms. Each variety of mushroom has some additional and unique property that the other variety didn't have. In my cooking, most of my recipes I make, I might pick the shiitake mushroom in the soup, but I'm picking usually one other mushroom with it. Maybe I'm putting some trumpet or some oyster or some, as you said, even cheaper mushroom like cremini with it. I'm mixing the shiitake with one of the mushroom. I so often pick the shiitake because it has that texture, like the meaty texture and add chewiness to the whatever flavor, but I'm usually adding one other type of mushrooms and variety of those mushrooms so that you can now buy organically, and they're available in the marketplace. And they look expensive. They might say, $10.99 a pound, But when you actually weigh it and you're using a variety of mushroom in your diet, it's not that expensive because you're only using maybe $1 worth of mushroom or $1.50 worth of mushroom per person or something. So it's not super expensive to add mushrooms to that meal because they're so lightweight and they have so much value. So I'm suggesting to people, even though they look expensive, buy the additional varieties and utilize them in the diet if you can, so you have some mushroom variety.
Well, we've been talking about mushrooms, and we were talking about beans and seeds and greens, which are all part of your G-BOMB formula. Another piece of that formula is the O in G-BOMB, which stands for onions, or the onion family, which includes garlic and scallions and chives and leeks and shallots and probably some others. A lot of people use these vegetables for their flavor, but they also do have powerful beneficial effects on the cardiovascular system, the immune system. They have anti-diabetic effects. They have anti-cancer effects. In fact, I saw a large European study recently again that found a 56% reduction in colon cancer risk, a 73% reduction in ovarian cancer risk, and a 71% reduction in prostate cancer risk in those people who consumed the most onions and garlic. Joel, what is it about these vegetables that are in the onion family that make them so highly beneficial?
Well, that's right, John. They occupy a unique space in the dietary landscape as having the highest concentration of these sulfur-containing compounds. We call them organosulfides. They're highest in quercetin. They're highest in chromium. They fuel the growth of the most favorable type of gram-positive bacteria. And this combination of greens, onions, and mushrooms and beans actually have the best effect on the stickiness factor of the bacteria that stick to the villi in the small intestines, creating this biofilm that helps protect us against diseases and also slow the absorption of glucose into the bloodstream. You ask me why onions are so protective. People know when they cut an onion, you know how it makes your eyes tear when you cut the onion? It's sulfenic acid. It's a sulfur-containing acid is being produced in the onion as you cut it, burning your eyes. And in the production of that acid, you're producing other beneficial sulfur-based compounds like MSM and other beneficial compounds that have beneficial effect on human immune function and human survival and aging. Onions have a tremendous beneficial effect. And since we're creating the sulfenic acid as you cut the onion, that the cell wall is being broken, it's a very important point here, because what I'm saying here is that if we chew the onion very well in our salad while we're eating it raw, we're breaking open those cell walls in our mouth. And the alliinase enzyme, ALLIINASE, the only word with 2 L's and 2 I's, so it's triple points in Scrabble. But anyway, the alliinase enzyme is fully activated, and you have more cancer effects because you chewed and liquefied that onion in your mouth. Whereas if you cook the onion and you deactivate the enzyme, and you wouldn't form any of those beneficial effects. You wouldn't form as much of the beneficial effects because you would have deactivated the alliinase with heat. So the way I make the soups and some of the cooked mushrooms, for example, is we take the onion and the leek and the shallot and the scallion, and we blend it and we puree it in the Vitamix or in the high-powered blender. So the chemical reaction, breaking open as many cells as possible. So we form the sulfenic acid and other beneficial sulfur-based compounds in the blender, and then we pour it into the soup to cook, to help thicken and flavor the base of the soup. Whereas if you put the onion in whole in the soup and then blended it once it was cooked, you would have deactivated those benefits. So my recommendations are that people eat onions raw. They should be putting onions and scallion on their salads every day. And when they're using their onions to use in cooked meals, they should, as much as possible, either finely chop them, but better yet, form an onion puree, which they thicken the base of the dish, whether you're making a lentil loaf, a bean burger, a vegetable wok, an Asian wok, or making a chili, whatever it is. I'm trying to say, use these onions in the dish for flavoring, but also puree it while it's raw and then pour it in to allow it to be cooked, because the cooking won't destroy the beneficial compounds if you allowed them to be fully formed before the heat was applied.
Well, that is fascinating. I want to ask you about another food topic that's controversial today. You recommend, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that those of us who don't eat fish regularly take an algae-based DHA and EPA supplement in a relatively low dose, maybe 200 or 300 milligrams total. Is that accurate? And if it is, can you explain why?
Yes. It's not accurate that I'm saying that every person has to take it, because there are some individuals that can produce sufficient DHA on their own from a well-designed diet with enough ALA from walnuts, soybeans, flax seeds, and green vegetables. But my 30 years of experience are that even people eating ideally, the majority of them don't produce an ideal amount of the DPA and DHA, because all the studies looking at this issue shows that brain shrinkage is proportional to the omega-3 index, the amount of omega-3 compared to omega-6 you have on your cell membranes. And levels, the omega-3 index is below 5, we see increasing risk of brain shrinkage and cognitive impairment with aging. And there were multiple studies that looked at this and showed the same thing. And as levels go to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1, we see a dose-dependent increased risk of dementia. And I have a very unique experience as you could say, primary care physician, as a family doctor, taking care of a huge amount in the vegan community over the last 30 years. And I think unique in having the experience of being able to care for people who've been on vegan diets into their elder years, 80s, 90s, and after 95 to 100 years old, seeing the outcomes of these elderly vegans developing neurologic problems and problems with dementia, and taking their blood and observing the low levels of DHA, some of which even developed Parkinson's, had non-existent DHA levels. And so I'm very concerned about this, because this idea that the vegan diet is perfect the way it is, and it's perfect for everybody, is not accurate. There's individual needs that we have to meet, and some people need some tweaking and don't thrive on this way of eating. Some people might need more of maybe taurine or creatine. For example, if they're becoming depressed or anxious and they're on a vegan diet, maybe they have a higher need for something. So there's some experience being a physician caring for this community for the last 30 years and helping people solve issues that could have arisen. And my biggest concern, of course, has been the incredible, how should you say, my exposure to my patients who have followed vegan diets over the years, developing some neurologic problems later in life that could have been prevented by making sure they have DHA adequacy and EPA adequacy. And the studies have borne out my findings and my clinical experience of the last 3 decades.
My understanding is that, yes, DHA and EPA are critical to brain health and heart health and a whole bunch of other functions in the body. But it's the ratio between omega-3s, such as DHA and EPA, and omega-6s that's also important. And so to get that ratio right, we need also to make sure we're not consuming too much of certain omega-6 oils, such as sunflower oil or safflower oil, or what's often called vegetable oil, which is a mixture of these things. Is that your understanding too, or could you elaborate on that?
Sure. Let's just talk about that, because it's very interesting too. It's that when we're measuring omega-3 index, we're talking about the percentage of the omega-3 fat versus the other fats on your cell membranes and your tissues. Now, if you're very overweight and you've eaten a lot of excess fats, whether it's oils or animal fats or any kind of fat, whatever is made, or sugar, whatever is made you fat, the body turns even the excess calories from excess carbohydrate into fat. That fat on the body is not omega-3 fat. And I could be giving this person extra omega-3 fatty acids in the form of a supplement, and their levels are still going to be poor on the index. It's still not going to be good because they have so much body fat opposing the beneficial fat I'm trying to give them for the supplement. The fat on your body is the largest factor that obstructs and imbalances your omega-3, omega-6 index. So it's this combination of being slim and getting the fat off your body and eating and supplementing, eating some omega-3 fatty acids from walnuts and flax seeds and greens, but also, and maybe taking some DHA or EPA at the same time, but also keeping your body fat low. Because the supplement's not going to work very well if your body fat is high. So there's lots of reasons why body fat interferes with this stuff. But it's not just the eating of oils. It's also the fact that people are overweight, which destabilizes and creates an unfavorable omega-6, omega-3 index. Furthermore, when you're slim, the extra omega-6 fats in the form of nuts and seeds don't matter that much to impair your index. Because let's say my body fat, let's say, Mom, using myself as an example, and my body fat's, let's say, a 10% body fat instead of the average American male's at 25% or something. Let's say my body fat's at 10%. Now, if I'm eating some, let's say, pecans or pistachio nuts, which are not high in omega-3, my body is going to burn those omega-6 fats for energy and not store them as fat on my cell membranes. And it'll store the little bit of omega-3 that I'm taking. And because I'm keeping my body slim, the body can preferentially burn the unfavorable. You don't have to avoid omega-6 fats if you're not overeating and you're slim and you're eating them from nuts and seeds, because your body fat's low, and your body will then take the omega-3 fats it needs and take the omega-6 fats it needs and burn off the rest. You follow me? So body fat plays a role here.
Well, thank you for that clarity. Joel, we live in a world where physicians typically know little or nothing about the power of nutrition to prevent, much less to treat disease. And given that reality, that unfortunate reality, your message is just a breath of fresh air. The amount of suffering that would be prevented if we all took heed of what you're saying is staggering. And I'm glad that millions of people are listening to you, to your guidance, and to your wisdom. And on behalf of Ocean and myself and everyone involved in the food revolution, and frankly, everyone who plans to eat for the rest of their lives, I thank you for your extraordinary work, for your years of dedication and perseverance, and of course, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Of course, wishing everybody great health and much happiness always.
We've been talking with Nutritional Research Foundation founder Dr. Joel Furhman, author of many bestsellers, including Eat to Live and his latest, Eat for Life. Joel, your brilliant work and your penetrating insights are a source of hope and of health for so many people all around this world. And we are so grateful to you for your partnership in the food revolution.
Thank you so much.
This concludes our interview, but our work is just getting started. If you feel supported and encouraged by what you just heard and want to share it with people you care about, if you want permanent access to 24 amazing presentations and transcripts, then check this out. You can get a download and a transcript of the entire Food Revolution Summit, plus a huge collection of ebooks, courses, trainings, recipes, and videos. And this empowerment package is available for a huge 50% discount between now and the end of the summit. For more information, please visit foodrevolution.org/empowerment. Again, that's foodrevolution.org/empowerment. Thank you for joining us in the Food Revolution, and we wish you and those you love good health always.